Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. In the past several years, the Islamic State has attracted thousands of foreign fighters and their families from around the world. Now that the governments of Syria and Iraq have announced victory over the extreme Muslim group, questions arise as to what will happen to those foreigners that seek to return in most cases to their home countries. To further discuss this challenge, I'm joined here in the studio by Lieutenant Colonel in Reserve Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Dr. Amira Halperin, who is a research fellow at the Hebrew University's Truman Institute. Welcome. Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding of the current challenge.
There's a famous story about the Second World War and an American fighter pilot who is shot over China and manages to convey a message to his home base saying, "I'm fine, but there are many foreigners here." He was the foreigner. They were the locals. So when we speak about foreign fighters, we have to define what is really foreign. And usually what we mean are people who came from out west. We don't really care about those who came from Central Asia or South Asia because the West wants to vet them before they get here. So if we focus on those who came from Europe, from the United States, or who are bound to infiltrate those places, we see that the coalition against ISIS managed to get over 95% of the territory earlier conquered by ISIS. But it did not manage to get 95 or perhaps even 65% of those fighters. There are thousands of people who may be on their way back home, and it takes a lot of cooperation between intelligence, law enforcement, and political organizations in order to block them at the door.
Colonel Ben Shalom?
I think we're relating to this as if it's a new challenge. Maybe ISIS is a new name, but the challenge of foreign fighters is not new. Last decade, we were dealing with hundreds of foreign fighters coming into Iraq and Afghanistan, and the Americans were meeting them there, trying to prevent them from coming in, and also dealing with the ramifications of them going back. Going back before that, we had the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and then they were called the Arab Afghans. It was also foreign fighters coming in. So I think it's first important to remember that it's not something new, and we should look back and see the lessons from back there. I think it's a huge challenge. We're probably going to talk now about what we should do about it, but at least it's not new.
Nevertheless, this is epidemic to a certain degree. When it comes to Syria, we saw the numbers. Of course, number one was fighters from Saudi Arabia, and then the list goes on. I think there were about 19,500 recorded Palestinians who have been fighting alongside Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State and other organizations, which is also a significant number. And of course, as Mr. Oren has stated, lots of foreign fighters from the West, from Europe, from the United States. Dr. Halperin, how do we deal with this challenge now that such a significant organization in a certain conflict is suddenly, to a certain degree, eradicated, and now those foreign fighters are seeking or to return home or to move from that place to a different place to restart their ideology?
It's very complex. The answer is very complex. I can tell you from our experience, from what I saw in Europe, when I visited there in order to conduct interviews with radical extremists in Britain, I can tell you that the problem is mainly with the radical people that were born there in Europe and are ready to conduct those terror attacks. And if we continue with what you said, it's not a new situation. The European governments already know about the difficulties and about the situation in Europe. If you ask me what is the solution is very well known, but it's very difficult to implement this solution. The solution should regard to policy, to the change in the policy, to involvement of the community, to make the people that immigrate or to Muslim-born that were born in Europe to learn more the language even, to understand better English, because most of them don't know the language. So this basic thing will not, in the end, will be a final solution, but it will definitely make it easier for those people to integrate in the society. And we have to bear in mind also that there is the other side of the Muslim community. There are the less radical people inside the Muslim community that are being affected by this difficult situation, and the cooperation with them also should be implemented.
Well, before we analyze possible solutions to the problem, let's try and understand better what is the challenge behind this problem. Mr. Oren, how do you perceive this challenge in a more broad understanding?
Well, first of all, there is the legal challenge, because what is the basis for governments acting against their own citizens, even if they went abroad? And we all remember the precedents of the Spanish Civil War with the international brigades, which to many people were a positive event, people going to fight against the fascists. And even here in Israel in 1948, we had what was called Machal, volunteers from abroad. This was in breach of the Neutrality Act in the United States, but obviously for Israel, they were heroes, and most of the American law enforcement agencies turned a blind eye to what they did. So first of all, the governments had to change their legal basis, and when they started acting against those citizens when they were abroad, such as Aflaki, when a drone raid conducted by the US government killed an American citizen without a judicial process. It was not an execution following a trial by judge and jury. This started to change. But when they come home and they are screened, one must present a case. If they simply show up at the border, it is not certain that they can be held, which means that they have to be put under surveillance. And it takes a lot of resources. If you're going to conduct surveillance 24 hours a day, 3 shifts, a lot of people will have to be involved, and governments are not yet prepared for that.
Colonel Ben Shalom, it seems like those people who have left their countries, be it the United States or EU member states or other countries around the world, obviously they moved with intent of becoming part of a different entity under different jurisdiction to a certain degree. The ideology, of course, in this specific discussion, the Islamic State, and they've created a very vast issue for their home countries. Now that they return, not only that they've already created the issue, but now they're also going to cost additional resources for those countries. How do countries actually deal with this?
Well, I agree that the legal issue is probably the leading factor here. The whole issue of counterterrorism, by the way, that's the case. That our laws are not yet aligned with reality. Reality moves forward faster than the law. As far as the need, of course, I think everyone understands. We tend sometimes in Israel to preach others and to tell them, oh, you don't understand the problem, you don't understand the threat. They understand very well. They're working very hard to change and cooperate. The Americans criticize the Europeans a little, maybe not doing it fast enough, but I think they're doing a lot. And don't forget that Europe is not the United States of Europe. It's 28 different countries that have to manage different languages, different cultures, different systems. And I think they're doing a relatively good job. But the threat, as they understand it now, is that these are radicalized people that come home, and I know there's a big argument, are these the same people that are doing the terror attacks? Because statistics so far show us otherwise, that most of the attack was homegrown, lone wolf attacks, but I think that's going to change. I think we're going to see more and more terror attacks from these returnees that have been radicalized. This is the threat, and the challenge now is how do we follow them and monitor them if we don't have hard evidence that they committed a crime? If all we know is that they traveled there, one day they came back, and that's it. So are they criminals or not? That's the question.
Dr. Halperin, how do you perceive this?
2 main problems that I think should be emphasized. The first one is the second generation, the children of the returnees that were born maybe in Iraq, maybe in Syria, and have been radicalized and learned about this extreme ideology that these people believed in. They believed in the jihad, they believe about the extreme. It was the Mujahideen first, Al-Qaeda then, and then now it's ISIS. So it's the same, head of the snake. So the second generation is a very difficult problem. And the second problem is, as we talked about, where to actually put these people. I mean, if you will concentrate all these people, for example, together, what will be the consequences? What will be the implementation of, for example, trying to tackle this problem by taking all these terrorists to be we're not sure that they're going to be terrorists. So if we look at the example, for example, of Hamas in 1902, when Hamas people were deported to Lebanon, and then they were being radicalized by Hezbollah there, and then the results was devastating. So the government is facing really a difficult situation here.
Nevertheless, Mr. Oren, when I discussed the topic with various officials, both in the intelligence world as well as people on the ground in Syria and elsewhere, they all came with a very decisive position in which the home countries have already come to the point where they're just revoking the citizenship under laws that were already granted by lawmakers several years ago. So we see a lot of people that are right now waiting in various camps that were established for those Islamic State affiliates or civilians for the most cases, who are, if it's women, of course, married to fighters, so the fighters would go to prison and the women would be in those camps waiting to actually for no end because the countries themselves will never claim those citizens.
Revoking citizenship may be effective short term for those countries, but it's a cynical ploy because it means only exporting the problem to the places where these people are staying, because if they are still radical, they are going to perform their terror art where they are. Now, President Trump usually tweets about people he doesn't like and calls them losers. In this case, this might be a very appropriate title because ISIS has lost. And if those people understand that they are now supporting a losing cause and that there is no chance for them to regain what they lost, they might start to go back into society. And as Dr. Halperin mentioned regarding integrating within the society, one could possibly learn from the experience of deprogramming cults. There are many youngsters in the West who have followed cults without mentioning specific names now, and their parents sent deprogrammers to come and fetch them and try to get the ideas out of their heads. This could work here because ideologically, if they understand that ISIS has lost and that even they perform those vengeful acts, it will not gain ISIS any victory. It might start them on the long and hard way to integrate back into
Nevertheless,
society.
you're touching here based on the ideology behind this. Doesn't this actually portray some kind of challenge, considering the ideology is a religion-based ideology?
I think I would say that ISIS did not lose. If I were an ISIS operative now, I would tell you guys, you don't understand us. We're morphing now. We're changing from a physical caliphate. We tested that a bit, but now we're going to go to the virtual caliphate. And we still exist. Of course, many thousands of us have been killed, unfortunately, but for the cause and for the long haul, that's okay. And now we're going to go back to our countries. It doesn't mean that it's tomorrow morning, but we have this ideology that counters yours. Wow, I'm starting to believe myself. This sounds scary. But this is it. Okay, so not all foreign fighters going back now are sleeping agents that have been directly instructed to carry out terror attacks, but certainly most of them have this ideology that opposes the West, and this could spring up, even if it's a child, that as we heard. And so I think the challenge is huge. As far as talking about solving the problem of ideology and in a way brainwashing them and making them westernized again, I don't even see that. I have no idea.
Dr. Halperin?
Those returnees, they have very comfortable area zone when they come back to Europe. They can just go to one of the mosques there, the radical one. They can meet other people that were born there or immigrated, never mind, but they have who to speak with, and they have ways to be influenced and radicalized and where to implement what they've learned there, and it's still a very difficult problem.
Mr. Owen?
We usually misuse the term terrorist, because there are many kinds of terrorists, and terror could be either a means to an end or the end itself. The original terrorists or anarchists perhaps wanted to use terror for the sake of terror, terrorizing the population. But most terrorists in the world, if you take, for instance, Palestinian terrorists 20 and 30 years ago, they had a political end in mind. They wanted to bring about the establishment of a Palestinian state without going into the merits of the case. And there are other people who use terrorist means in order to advance their ends. ISIS, their only idea was to establish this caliphate, and a virtual caliphate is no substitute for that. There are many ideologies in the world, many religions. The fact that they are in existence does not and in itself advance it. So if they see that there is no real chance of having a foothold in Iraq and Syria, now perhaps they are moving elsewhere. They're moving into Africa, Indonesia, who knows? But if they see that they have no chance of establishing any base, they may gradually erode their support and may see the light. We saw other movements around the world, the Red Brigades, Baader Meinhof, other terrorist movements which seemed at the time unshakable, and we saw later that they have ceased to exist. There are, on the other hand, criminal organizations like the mafia in its various forms, which you can't fight, and people get used to the idea that crime is here from time immemorial, and it is going to be with us for eternity.
Colonel Ben Shalom?
We have to be careful not to blow this kind of threat out of proportion. First, many thousands of them have been killed, and listen to the leadership, the American leadership at this. They use very strong words, also in the goal of eradicating them and annihilating them, and being proud of the many thousands that they killed. Also, look now at the numbers that are going back. It's not that many, probably many, because many of them are so stuck on the way and trying to make their way there. There, I mean the West. Many are probably making way to the Philippines, Libya, Sinai province of ISIS, and other places. So bottom line, we're going to be talking about hundreds and maybe several thousands of these people. Some of them may be disillusioned from this, changed course, want to be rehabilitated. And then at the end of the day, we're not talking about people with atomic bombs. We're talking about radicalized people. And once these countries change their systems, their collaboration, their databases, we should be talking about this, then we will be able to curtail these attempts, and once in a while there will be a terror attack.
Nevertheless, when we're looking at the situation in Syria, for instance, we're talking about, obviously, the U.S.-led coalition and the various forces on the ground. Everybody, every actor in a war tries to amplify his victories. The situation against the Islamic State, according to various people that have spoken on the ground, is very different from what is portrayed in the media. Right now, the Islamic State has retreated, but even in the situation in Raqqa, where they reached a deal with the Islamic State, or the remaining fighters that were held up in the hospital in Raqqa, eventually they tried to not televise it. Videos came out, of course, from that situation, where instead of a few hundred fighters, we saw thousands of fighters leaving Raqqa, still strapped with bombs to their vests and ready to fight in a different area. So how can we actually realize to what extent is this Islamic State actually eradicated, and will they use those various victories in their perceived mind as a situation where they can take their fight elsewhere, or in the West, or as Mr. Oren has stated, in Northern Africa or other places around the world?
I'll just answer very short. Usually today, modern warfare is not counting the number of targets that you strike. It's the effects. But here in this war, especially the Americans, were counting the numbers of heads. And I think they did a good job, at least with this goal that they set out, and they did kill many, many thousands. I don't know the numbers, but many thousands. Yet this means nothing, of course, to the thousands that are left, and the fact that this idea has not been extinguished, and it's just a continuation. So were they wrong with the goal? I don't know. But they did succeed in what they set out to do.
Dr. Halperin?
The ideology is still there. The ideology isn't dead. So maybe ISIS is, but the ideology is still there. And we have to remember also that the terrorism is a global phenomenon. We speak about global problems. We talked about Palestinians. We have to remember that people in Europe, Muslims in Europe, can be ready to conduct terrorism or other attacks because of the Palestinian problem, for example, and maybe someone has a personal problem and they would go out there. So maybe we should not overestimate the problem, or maybe we shouldn't say we have like you said, like we don't have nuclear weapons out there, and maybe it's not so bad. But the fact that people in Europe that don't live in a conflict area like here in Israel, they don't have the Hamas inside them, they have to live in fear. Even if it's not everyday fear, but it's still there, and it's a global situation, and therefore also the cooperation should be a global cooperation, and there is an intelligence cooperation, of course, between countries, because this is now the main thing to understand. These terrorist organizations are links between countries. It's in Europe, in Asia, in the US, all of them, they work together. Even Hamas is not only in Gaza and the West Bank. Hamas is based in the US and in Europe as well.
Mr. Oren, I'd like to touch base now on the ways the West and the world at large is trying to deal with this challenge. Of course, we've been talking about the legal issues to this challenge, but how do you perceive it? What is the next step for the various countries to deal with those foreign fighters?
Granted, this is a difficult problem, but it seems as if governments are taking the easy way out in dealing with it, because they are concentrating on known people. If they have intelligence, and some of the records have been seized in various raids, and perhaps they know the identity of several thousands. But this is the easy way out, because these are not battalions. The ISIS underground command is not going to send 1,000 fighters to raid a specific target. And it's much more dangerous if there are two other sets of terrorists. One is the sleeper cells already in place, waiting for the right opportunity to strike, and others are not even aware themselves that they can become terrorists, but can be inspired by the ideology and use homemade measures, ramming by car, chemical agents. If you see the warnings that the Department of Homeland Security is putting up in the States, they concentrate on disruptions of aviation and other transportation and other sorts of clandestine warfare, which can be used, but it is not necessarily from foreign fighters. The only advantage that foreign fighters have over others is that they know their local area. And what the law enforcement agencies in various places can do is have a network of informers telling them who is missing, who from the community is known to have been missing for the last year or two and is suspected of being radicalized. And it's a very painstaking effort, but it must be done.
You were talking about the right moment to strike. Do you believe that there is some kind of hierarchy of a various mechanism in place whereby they are waiting also for the decision makers to take such an action forward?
Probably not, because with social media and other modes of communication, you don't have to wait for someone to push it to you top down. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to go from some commanding general or some supreme authority to the lowest rung on the ladder. It's enough for you to look at a website or hear the news, feel radicalized, leave home, get in your car, and ram someone.
Colonel Ben Shalom?
I think ISIS made a very stupid mistake, and they gave us an abundance of intelligence. When I say us, I mean all the countries that are trying to oppose them. And a lot of material has been caught. So bottom line, I believe that our intelligence agencies know very well who they are, name by name. And I think what should be done, and what probably is being done, is that in a collaborative effort, each and every name is tracked. Every single person, his whereabouts, where he is, what he did. Of course, if it can go to a legal case, and some of this is already done, including in Israel, then this is, of course, dealt with and people are prosecuted. But if not, we're going to have hundreds of people that they went, they came back, and now they just have to be tracked and followed. Another thing that assists us today is technology, artificial intelligence, systems that are able to monitor. It's not that you see a case and say, okay, he went to a mosque and he was talking about a bomb, but but sophisticated artificial intelligence that can point to a certain person and say, he has a change of pattern and he rented a car, he never rents a car. A plus B plus C means check him out. He's going to do something. And this is the kind of thing that is being done in Europe today.
Dr. Halperin?
Relating to new media and new technologies problem, two things. First, terrorists and people that can be radicalized use the media even in remote areas, and they can see terrorist attacks in Europe and copycat. The second thing is the major problem that Facebook is facing and other social media organizations with tackling the problem of the usage of terrorist organization and radical Islamists of social media, a very serious problem. And the third thing, of course, is the ability of the young Muslims to connect and to link between them by using mobile phone applications, etc.
Well, we're drawing to the end of the program, and I'd like to give each and every one of you the opportunity to give a short analysis of how do you think or believe things might unravel in the near future. Mr. Owen, we'll start with you.
Governments throughout the years have used foreign legions, such as the French Foreign Legion, if they didn't want their own citizens or did not have enough of them to fight for them. Now they're facing the opposite problem. Their own citizens coming from abroad where they fought against these governments. If they cooperate to a fuller extent than it is now, if they stop them at the border and at the same time look inward to see where the threats are within the country and not try the easy way out, there is a chance for them to lessen the phenomenon. They cannot bring it down to absolute zero.
Colonel Ben Shalom?
I think Israel is a very small player, but we should contribute, and we are contributing our part under the radar, especially with intelligence sharing, being part of this international data bank and tracking them.
Well, Israel is also dealing with foreign fighters of its own that are returning now from
and
those
we're just
battle zones.
one of the players, a humble player, but that has very vital information, capabilities, and I think we can contribute, and we are.
Dr. Halperin?
There is a change in recent years. In the beginning, before the terror attacks occurred in Europe itself on its soil, the governments were more indifferent to this situation. Today there is a change. It's still, we can see it's still a very minor change, but I see that the situation is maybe getting better in terms of policy, in terms of security. But I don't think that the situation will be better as a definite. I cannot say that there will not be terrorist attacks in Europe.
Last sentence, Mr. Oren.
It's the topic of our conversation today, and it's an important one, but we shouldn't leave the focus on the foreign fighters. All in all, the fight against ISIS has been a success. The coalition has won. In 3 years, it has reversed the gains that ISIS made, and perhaps there is a fallout by virtue of these foreign fighters, but the main picture is that ISIS has lost.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today, so I'd like to thank Colonel Ben Shalom, Mr. Oren, and Dr. Halperin for coming here today, and I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time. TV7 Israel's mission is to give you, our viewers, truthful information, which in effect will give you a chance to really understand what is happening in Israel and its region. If you're blessed by our programs and believe our mission to be important, we urge you to support us and become a voice for Israel. You can support us by going to our website at tv7israelnews.com. This program was made possible through your donations.